Yo, what's up guys? Welcome back to the shop. Spraying cabinets can be intimidating. I know at least it was for me when I was first getting started. So in this video, we're gonna break it down and make it really, really simple. Here we go. All right, so we're gonna be spraying the cabinets that we built with Jason from Bourbon Moth last week. And I know when I worked in a cabinet shop years ago, I didn't do any spraying there. So that was the one thing that I didn't really learn. We had guys at the shop and that was all that they did was the spraying. So I didn't have to do it. So as I started to do side jobs and eventually venturing off onto my own, the spraying was something that I had to figure out. And it was intimidating. And to be honest, if you start Googling and searching and getting into the whole spraying thing, there's a lot of information out there and it can be very, very overwhelming. At least, like I said, it was for me. So I've got it down now to a really simple process, not crazy expensive equipment, and I can lay down a really, really nice finish. So we're gonna get into all the details on this stuff and I'm gonna explain to you my finishing process and what works for me. All right, so the first thing we need to do is kind of take everything off, take the drawer fronts and doors off. Some of this stuff still needs to be sanded and stuff like that. So for instance, like one drawer front, the amount of time that you're actually spending spraying that drawer front is very, very small. Most of your time is spent prepping it and sanding it and then spraying it and then sanding it again. So most of your time goes into the prep work. So sanding and doing all that stuff is gonna make your finished product look that much better. So taking the time to prep everything well and sand everything really good is gonna pay off for you. I know it's one of those steps that like you get everything built, it's looking really good, and then it's like, now we gotta sand it. And it takes time and it's annoying and nobody likes to do it, but it's a very important process, or part of the process. So take your time, prep well. I'm gonna get started taking this all apart and we'll get to sanding. So typically I would not put everything together, meaning attach all my drawer fronts and then take them back off to be painted. I would just kind of dry fit and check everything with spacers and then get ready for sanding. But since Jason was here last week and we were making the video, we wanted to obviously show the finished product. So we did all that extra work just for you guys. It was all for you. So yeah, taking everything apart and making sure I label everything. I labeled the back of each drawer front and the bottom of each drawer, so I know exactly where everything goes back and what drawer front goes on which, and that'll just make everything go back together really easy. So I take my time to label everything. And yeah, it's a trash pull out. It's a Reassembly double trash pull out. I like using those. I typically don't like a lot of Reassembly stuff, but I do like their dovetail wooden trash pull outs. They're pretty nice. And so then we move over to the workbench to start sanding. So this is obviously the back of the door. And remember, if you watched last week's video, the assemblies of the doors, they're 1/2-inch panels, so they get rabbited. And so there I was just centering that rabbet to make sure the gaps are all good around it. And then I pin the panel. And that's all that holds my panel in place. And then this red stuff I'm using is this 3M red glazing putty, and I like to use that. It works only for very small cracks or little pinholes to fill stuff like that. It does not work for filling big gaps or big holes or anything like that. And it also dries really fast, so that's really nice too. And sanding the doors, you know, gotta hit all the edges, break all the edges. I break everything by hand. So it takes a little while, you know. Each door is probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 minutes, something like that. doors and drawer fronts are all sanded. I'm going to start getting some primer on these. And then while the backs of these are drying, we'll pull face frames off and start prepping those for paint as well. All right, so now we're getting into the good stuff. And this is to show you guys that you don't need to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on expensive spray equipment to lay down a nice finish. I'm spraying with these Graco X5 pumps from Home Depot. They're a little over $300. Or at least they were the last time I bought one. And they're just airless pumps. So they're literally just pumping paint through. When I started with HVLP years ago. And that seemed to be the way everybody was spraying stuff. And so I spent thousands on the turbine and guns and a bunch of stuff. And I just was never able to get the finish I was looking for. And then I went out and bought one of these, and I haven't looked back since. So these are really great. I know that they are, they're inexpensive, and they're not like an air assisted. Now, I mean, this isn't to say that there isn't really nice, expensive equipment out there, even the airless pumps, air assisted stuff, it gets expensive, but for me, these work. And so I'm just sticking with these. I've never had a pump fail on me. I use a fine finish 308 tip, and that seems to atomize this product really well, and lays down really nice. So that's all I'm spraying with. Now I did splurge earlier this year on this spray booth ventilation system, but for years, I've always had kind of janky spray setups where I just have like a drum fan in the door, and that's kind of my exhaust. So this is not totally necessary to lay down a really good finish. It does make it nicer, especially in my shop, and it's definitely nice to have for sure. But yeah, we're gonna lay down primer. I'm gonna do 2 coats of primer on everything. I'm gonna start with a really light coat, sand that, hit it with another coat, and that way we could just build the product a little bit, and then we'll sand that again and move to the top coat. All right, so really quickly, I do want to point out one thing, or talk about the pros and cons of airless versus HVLP. For me, typically I'm spraying larger projects, a kitchen, a full house with the cabinets, vanities, whatever. So I'm spraying a lot of stuff. So these are faster. These put out a lot more material a lot faster than an HVLP. That being said, with these, you're gonna use more material because you're gonna waste more material because there's more overspray with these. You're gonna lose some in the hose when you're cleaning out the gun. So you're gonna use more material as far as paint goes. But the pros outweigh the cons with using airless for what I'm doing. If you're spraying smaller projects and stuff like that, HVLP is probably a much better option. If I do have to spray just like one small item, yeah, it's a pain in the butt to have to load up the whole thing, the whole gun or the whole hose with paint just to spray one small item. So in that particular case, HVLP would be better. But for what I do, the airless definitely is is just better for me. All right, so here we go, busting open a can of this primer, and you'll see here how thick it is. It definitely is just, I could spray it out of my gun and it's fine, but I do like to thin it a little bit just to make it dry a little quicker, it lays down a little nicer. So here we go with my stack of doors and drawer fronts, and we're going to hit the back with a light coat. Now, one of the things you want to think about, especially when you're spraying bigger projects like this where you have a lot of stuff to spray, is think ahead a little bit so you always have something to be doing. So I'm going to spray all these, and then while these are drying, I know I can go over and take my face frames off or take my fridge panels and sand my fridge panels. And then by the time I'm done sanding these will be ready to flip and hit the other side, and then I can hit my fridge panels, and then I can sand my face frames. So just think ahead a little bit so you don't paint everything and then you're just kind of sitting there waiting for that coat to dry. You always want to keep moving, and that'll just make the whole process go a little faster. And the other thing is too, like my fridge panels, when I spray those in here, I spray them and then I have to let them sit there because they're too big for me to pick up and handle and get them out of there by myself while they're wet. So they need to sit in there and dry. So I need to make sure that I have something else to do while those are drying. And then another thing to think about when you're setting up a spray area or getting ready to spray a project, or if you're new to it, like what are the things you want to be thinking about? So I would say the first thing you want to think about is what are you going to be spraying with? Like what kind of equipment do you have? If you have like a 2-stage turbine, spraying like a latex paint or something probably isn't going to be your best option because it's just not going to atomize well. So think about what kind of equipment you got, where you're going to spray it, what kind of ventilation you have, and like what product you're going to spray. I used to spray stuff in my garage. I would set up a fan in the door, and that was my ventilation system, and I did that for years. So here's my doors. I'm sanding them in between coats of primer. I sand everything by hand, especially after that first coat of primer, just because it's such a light coat that if I took my sander to this door and hit the back of it and my rails and stiles, I'm going to just blow through that primer. So I'm using 320 and I just hit everything by hand. And then after that first coat of primer, you'll notice some imperfections and stuff that you may have missed or whatever. And that's where that 3M glazing putty again comes in really handy because you can lay that right over primer. And then here I've got my light set up, which is a good idea. I don't know how he set it up though, but that's called raking light, where the light is down low and it's kind of shining across your workpiece and it just highlights any scratches and imperfections and stuff like that with just an overhead light could be difficult to see. We get a second coat on everything. Again, this is still the primer here. And the spray booth is working out really nice. The ventilation, the air is pulling it down, that fan, so it kind of draws all the air down. So one of the things I've noticed is when I'm spraying, like when I flip the doors over and I did the final top coat on the top, sometimes you get overspray that builds up on the back side of the door and it won't be as smooth. But I noticed with this, it actually works really well at just pulling all that overspray down, and it doesn't really, the backs of my doors were still very, very smooth, which is really nice. So my face frames, if you remember from the build video last week, if you didn't see that, I'll put the link here. Go and watch that. But I attached all the face frames with lamello, tensos, and so I just had a few in each frame there. So you just pop them off, and then we can spray everything and then snap them back on with some glue afterwards. And the face frames I did sand last week, kind of as I was prepping them to put on the boxes. So here I'm just touching them up, hitting any spots I may have missed, and then we'll spray the face frames. So face frames are one of the more tricky things to spray because there's so many edges and stuff like that that you need to hit. So for my first coat on the face frames, I stand them up and I just get a real light coat on everything, on the back, on all the edges, the whole thing. And then for the second coat and the top coat, I do lay it on its back and make sure I get a really good coat on the face that will lay down. The one nice thing about this water-based product is the vertical hold on it is really, really good. it's not impossible to get drips, obviously, but it is it just holds way better than like lacquer. Lacquer, in my experience, spraying lacquer stuff vertical, it's super easy to get runs. And especially with a face frame, you have so many pieces intersecting, so you're getting a lot of layers in certain spots. So that's just another reason why face frames are difficult and tricky and hard to not get runs when you're spraying big frames like this. And then back to the doors and drawer fronts for the final coat of primer on the face. And the primer always looks super nice. Like, you build 2 nice coats of primer and it is just so smooth and dries really, really nice. You can see there, obviously it's not dry, but all right, so here is my top coat. Now, what I'm doing is I'm mixing both gallons into one bucket. My reason for doing this is, and I've had this happen to me in the past, where they give you the same color in different cans, and then you go through 1 gallon and then you move on to the next gallon and it is just slightly different. And I've had this happen to me where I've had 2 doors next to each other and you're just like, those are different colors. So I take all the colors of top coat, or all the gallons of top coat, and I'll mix them together. In this case, I mixed them and then did pour them back into each of their gallons, just because I didn't have a top for that bigger 5-gallon bucket, but you could just leave them in a larger bucket. And then here is one of my doors. This was just the primer. You could see just how nice that primer lays down. I mean, that's after 2 coats, just looking really nice. And then we'll scuff these up lightly. At this point, after my first coat of primer and I filled imperfections again, at this point the doors should be dialed in and just ready for that top coat. And I have been really impressed with the water-based product now that I've been using it for almost a year. I'm very happy and very pleased with it. After spraying lacquer for years, and lacquer's great, it's really easy to work with, but if you don't have the proper ventilation or spray booth set up, I mean, it's gnarly stuff and you don't want to be breathing it in. So water-based, in my opinion, is the way to go. If you asked me this 2 years ago, I would have said no way, but I am definitely a fan of the water-based. So here's my top coat going on one of the fridge panels. Do a cross-hatching pattern on these. The larger panels, you kind of have to move fast. You don't want to end up with lines. And then while that was drying in there, I can move out here and sand my face frames. These still needed 1 more coat of primer. And then I get my other fridge panel done. Do a cross-hatching pattern on this as well. And so with the airless, you can obviously see how much overspray is coming off the gun. But yeah, look at that. Fridge panel is looking nice. It's laying down really well. Alright, and then here you can see I laid my face frame down and gonna get my second coat of primer on these. Anyways, hope everybody in the States had a nice Thanksgiving weekend and enjoyed some time with family and stuff like that. And if you're not in the States, hopefully you just had a good weekend. We had some family over and we just chilled and ate a bunch of food and watched some football on Thursday, so that was cool. Here's my doors and drawer fronts. We are spraying the top coat on the backs of these. And this stuff does not need to be thinned. It comes out of the can and it is much thinner than the primer. And I am just doing one top coat. I found building those 2 coats of primer and then one top coat, and it comes out really, really nice. Back to my face frames. This is final coat on the face frames. Why I didn't have that laying flat, I don't know. When I took it out and laid it on the bench outside to dry, I did lay it flat on its back. And then the island. I got that thing sanded up and masked off. And then I was nervous it wasn't going to make this turn here, but it worked out. It worked out. That workbench is screwed to the ground, so I didn't really want to unscrew it and move it out of the way. So luckily, this thing fit right in there. I saved this till the end just because I wanted to leave it in there so I could prime it, sand it, top coat it, and not have to worry about taking it in and out of the spray booth. So same thing with this, light coat on the whole thing, and then we'll come back and sand and hit it with another coat. And this is going to be a lot of fun getting into Jason's house. I'm pretty sure we're going to have to carry it around the house, up some stairs, onto the deck, and then into the back door, because, yeah, you can see it's like 37.5 wide, and it's just not going to fit through the front door and around the staircase in the front of the house. So it'll be interesting getting this thing into the house. And then you can see I'm hitting any imperfections with that red glazing putty. And then sand. Go through a lot of 320 sandpaper. We hit that thing again. And the nice thing, this water-based stuff, it does dry. It does dry pretty quick. This is always fun, taking off your masking, knowing everything is done. You can start putting things together. It's always nice to see things come together at the end. And yeah, it's just a fun part of the project. So that cabinet there is for above the fridge. So those fridge panels connect to the sides. Obviously there you can see we've got some Clamex, Lamello Clamex connectors to pull everything in nice and tight when we go to install this. Get those doors adjusted as best we can. And then we'll snap some face frames on. So I'm using Rue Glue. It's great for non-porous material, so I'm using it because, remember, I did hit the back of the face frames with primer. And then we'll snap this thing on. Now, Lamello does make some, I don't even know what they're called, but they go into your piece, and it just makes it easier when you have a bunch of biscuits you're trying to line up like I am here. It makes it easier. It opens up one of the connectors so it's wider, and it just makes it easier to align everything. There are these little preload clips, which I need to get some, because sometimes it's just tricky making sure everything is lined up before you snap them together. And again, this is one of my favorite uses for the Lamello. Being able to have your face frames just snap on like that is really, really nice. Hang some doors, get everything adjusted. A lot of questions about hinges too. These are Bloom full inset hinges. with a 0mm plate, so the inside of my face frame is flush with the plywood box. And if you watched last week's video, you would know that. So if you didn't watch last week's video, you should go watch it. Trash pullout. Again, all this stuff was already attached, so just lining up the holes and screwing it back together. Jason already had that thing dialed in, and it went back together just as he had it, which is awesome, because trash pullouts can be a little bit annoying to install. And that thing is looking good. And then back into the booth to hit the final coat on the island. And that's done. So I had that island sprayed within 2.5 hours. Here's the rest of my drawer fronts. You can see everything just is looking really, really good. And then, yeah, here's the finished product. Stoked with how it all turned out. Can't wait to get this stuff installed. All right, guys, that's it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully maybe you learned something. Hopefully I didn't make it complicated. I want it to seem simple, because it doesn't need to be overcomplicated. Maybe you learned something. Maybe you learned what not to do. I don't know. Hopefully you enjoyed it though. This came out really nice. We're gonna get this stuff delivered and installed at Jason's house this week. So there will be an install video coming. I know that's one that I get requested a lot, is the install video. Also, I know there's a lot of new subscribers from last week's video. So thank you guys for subscribing. And if you're new this week, hit the subscribe button and subscribe. And you'll see more videos like this every Sunday morning. If you have questions, anything like that, leave them below. I tried to get to all the comments. Sometimes they get lost. It's hard to answer every comment. We do have the Patreon. The link is below. We're doing a weekly Zoom call, which we've already started. So if you want to be a part of that and join the community over there and be involved in the conversation, you can do that too. All my socials and everything are down below. My website, you can order some merch, is down below in the description. And yeah, that's it. We'll see you next week, and we'll be installing this stuff.